Hi there, my name is Nicky Adolfi and I'm here with Sarah Holbway. We are the directors of the Autonomy Hotline. We've just developed a resource. It's a mock-up of an initial child protection conference, ICPC, with a large number of our team. And we thought we'd just do an introductory sort of video on what is contained in that ICPC and what viewers need to be looking for when they watch it. Sarah, do you want to add anything to that?
So we developed this resource so that we can show people what typically might happen in a meeting. Obviously, every meeting really truly is individual and unique, and you'll have different dynamics and different people in the meeting. But we just sort of brought together the most common situation that happens in these meetings.
Yeah. So what we'll do is we'll go through each of the characters that are present in this particular case, and we'll just go through what perhaps we might be looking for with these kind of character profiles. So the first one I'm going to start with is probably the doctor character. So we've got mum who is not taking her epilepsy medication, and she's got two children. So she's the doctor considers her at risk of harm. However, she's also quite naturally minded, perhaps exploring other things. And this can raise alarm bells, but equally, some people find natural remedies and things quite useful and actually aids healing and recovery. So let's start with our Dr. John Rogers. So what sort of things would he be saying, and what are we looking out for in an ICPC meeting if a medical person comes into the picture?
So with medical people, obviously, they tend to be medically minded, as that's their training. They want to make sure that everyone's medical needs are being met. I think the concern with doctors when patients aren't sort of taking medication, or if they're looking at natural healing, is that are they doing so responsibly? Now, obviously, we're called the Autonomy Hotline, so we've got a firm belief in everybody having autonomy. Not all professionals will understand complete autonomy over your life. And there will be some concern if you're not doing as prescribed. I think the thing you need to watch out for in that is that you are making them understand that you are taking full responsibility and that you are being, I don't know, sort of safe, I suppose, with the choices that you are making.
Thank you. So I read somewhere that about 50% of people don't always take their medication. It's quite a high amount, and nothing may come of it. But as soon as something comes into a child protection issue, medication is a big, big, big red flag for social workers and professionals there. So that's something to be mindful of. Is there is an expectation of managing your medical needs, and any failures will be seen as a failure and will be sort of weaponized a little bit in the meeting. And I think we did see that in the video recording that we did. And so that's probably quite a useful aspect to see how the doctor would view that. And that is probably common with most of the cases that we've seen, even
Yeah.
though not taking medication is actually quite a normal thing to do. It's quite normal for the average person not to take it for whatever reason and for things to happen. I guess there is a danger, like when children are in the mix, that there are risks, and it's whether that is a real risk or whether it's a perceived risk that we want the viewer to be guessing. So as you watch the video, have a look and see, do you think this is a real risk, or is it exaggerated a little bit because of the medical professional's status? That's
Yeah.
something to be very, very aware of when you're in a child protection situation.
Agreed, agreed. The other thing to be mindful of in medical settings is missed appointments.
Yeah,
That can raise a huge red flag.
yeah. It's
Obviously,
always best to cancel and have
yeah,
got
as I say, in normal
documentation.
day-to-day life, we've all forgotten an appointment.
Mm.
We've all been, forced to reschedule for a million reasons, but there is a massive risk, particularly if you're already on radar, that missing appointments, even sort of cancelling appointments, can be a bit iffy.
Yeah.
Too many appointments, and I don't have a number for how many are too many. but particularly for a long-term condition like epilepsy, asthma, sort of conditions that are long-term and chronic,
Mm.
um, that there is a massive concern there for missing appointments, that you're not managing well.
So in our little mock-up of ICPC, we also had a health visitor because we've got two children in this hypothetical situation. One's 10 and one's like 3. And although a health visitor might not be involved in a sort of older child past the age of about 2, they used to be there till about 5 years old. I think perhaps with budget cuts or whatever, perhaps that's gone down. But sometimes they are involved, especially if there are other needs for the children. And sometimes they're a little bit old school and a little bit kind of, we want you to come in and we want you to do this. And so we wanted to put that dynamic in there for a child that was sort of preschool age. Sort of 3-ish, 3 years was probably the age that we felt that was kind of realistic in terms of bringing in other dynamics. So the health visitor, what can you comment about the video, but also in general?
In general, I think that health visitors, some people find them very useful. Some people don't find them useful. Quite often, particularly if you have more than one child, you can sort of feel like, um, you already know what you know and you don't feel you need that support. And sometimes, again, although it's perfectly legal and you're perfectly well within your rights to say no to a health visitor, again, that can cause some shift, particularly if you're on the radar already, that you
They
aren't.
are optional legally. They are optional. You do not have to use any of the resources for like the preschool age, birth to 2, 3, 4, whatever. It's completely optional. However, there is this element that an absence of support can be seen if you suddenly come under the professionals' watch for any reason. The absence of that support can be viewed very critically. So
Absolutely.
sometimes I think it's been a real 50-50 mix in terms of health visitors, in terms some of them are very coercive, controlling, undermining of the parent. Others can be amazingly supportive. And I think it's really, they're an odd mix. Like there's no consistency in terms of who you get.
That's it. And I think I think that's the biggest problem people find is that when they click with the health visitor, they'll probably be more likely and willing to engage and more likely and willing to sort of say, well, yeah, I'll see you once, whenever. Um, and then they sort of have a little chat and it's great. And then other times people find it very difficult, very coercive. And they can find that, the health visitors may not say agree with co-sleeping, or they may not agree with something that you are doing that's your family thing.
And they can be quite triggering with social care. Like they can be a source of referrals, which can be very complicated. I think most social services, they won't act on something small because their thresholds are much higher, but it
Mm.
can frighten families into not engaging. So there is that problem there where there's that immediate link to referrals to social services and children's workers, and that can trigger a phone call or a visit. And that's really, really hard for parents because it immediately leads to distrust of professionals.
Mhm, mhm.
Should we go on to the next one? So who have we got? So we actually included a preschool manager. She had a prior engagement, so she was just there for the very early start, and then left her scoring at the end. And the point of that was to give someone safe, someone who would normally give a safe score, but is compromised because of what she's now listening in the room. So do you want to comment on that a little bit more, Sarah?
Okay. So quite often, like if your child goes to preschool, somebody from the preschool would be invited to these meetings just to weigh in a bit more. Quite often you've probably got quite a good relationship with the preschool because if your child's going, say, 3 days a week, you do build up that nice rapport.
It's optional again, like you wouldn't necessarily have that person in the room, but sometimes it does
It
happen.
happens,
Yeah.
and I think it's happening more now that there's more children going to nursery than there ever have been. But they don't necessarily want to get involved. They don't necessarily, want to come along. They don't necessarily feel they have a place in this. Um, but you do build up a good rapport with these people, and they can often feel quite safe in terms of maybe you've got a little niggle with your child. Um, and because they see children all day, every day, they can just sort of either say or say, maybe you need to see somebody, or no, I've seen that 1,000 times, perfectly normal. So sometimes they can be a real source of support if you're, I don't know, just maybe worried that, like maybe baby's wetting again, or not baby, toddler, yeah, after being dry successfully for some time, they can just be that little source of rapport because they see your child all the time as well.
Mm. And so in this particular scenario that we created, we made her that, had no concerns and turned up and said so in the meeting. And then suddenly there's a shift once there's this, what we call groupthink that occurs. So you get everyone commenting on the negativity, it kind of spills over. So of course, then she suddenly goes, oh, well, I remember this and I remember this happening. And that feeds into the scoring at the end, which was much like a lower score. It's a bit strange in safety scoring in that a 0 is high risk and 10 is low risk. So she gave a lower score at the end when she was going to be higher, as in it was going to be, safe. And that kind of groupthink element really stepped in
Yeah.
to this, but it also compromised that mother's one person in that room that she could trust. So once you get professionals in that room and that space, it can really undermine the trust that people have.
Mm. Yeah. And I think because people tend to confide in these people they've got a rapport with, um, it can be quite difficult then to keep the trust in people that you thought you could trust.
Yeah. We'll move on to the head teacher. So, Fraser from Fraserville. Really nice, funny names I chose because I don't know, it just works. Mr. Cottington, because that's how we referred to him, very sort of strict head teacher, amicable but very academic. Definitely school is the place to go. And we've got a problem with these children, so not really able to, the older child is missing out because mum is struggling to get the younger one up and ready and get out on time. So, we have a lot of issues with education. I think there's a lot of pressure at the moment, a lot of blame on mothers, and I think we really tried to pull that into the meeting. I think that really came through. So, what sort of issues are coming through education wise, and what about this
Um,
particular scenario?
so education, I think that there is obviously a massive expectation that one conforms. And sometimes you'll get, good teachers who might understand just how difficult it is. And in this scenario, obviously, Kelly was a single mum and she's got more than one child, and finding that difficult. Um, what we're seeing with education is, well, it's your responsibility to get your child up and here. We need this perfect attendance. There's a real pressure for families to maintain this 100% attendance score, and the reflection it has on the school or the place of education. And I think that then is putting a lot of pressure on families to maintain the school's status. And it's like
Yeah,
the
yeah, it's
family
not about the family, it's
responsibility,
about the school. Yeah, that's a good
the
point.
family's responsibility to maintain the school's narrative. And I think that's really hard on families to do sometimes.
We've had situations where mothers, particularly, have been in a domestic abuse relationship, have had to move, and they are moving sort of half an hour or more away from that school, and still having to come in. And so lateness in attendance is an issue. And then now we've got increased penalties from the local authority for missed days, and
Mm.
mums are then equally financially vulnerable to those additional penalties at times when their vulnerability is like at a massive level and they're feeling rock bottom. And also, in this particular scenario, we see that the older one has some sort of ADHD, or has he? And that's what we're sort of left guessing. However, you could imagine that the school runs are difficult. And does this child play up? Is it deliberate? Is it ADHD? Is there a diagnosis? Does she need more support? Or is it the fact that she's just not coping with the expectations? There's a lot of questions, and I want the audience to see that. So as you're playing it, think through all those different layers of what could or couldn't be, and
And
what
also
do you
think
do?
about what level of support she needs. Like if the
Yeah,
child does have ADHD, what support she needs. If he's just playing up, what does she need?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, thinking about both, you know, it counterbalancing all of that about what it is that this mum needs
Mm.
and how the school, what could the school offer and what is outside support is needed.
Coming on to the police officer, so we have lovely Amy Cullen, who did an excellent job of being a police officer. And often in an ICPC conference, you might get somebody there who just looks over the criminal history and says, "Well, there's nothing," and that's the end of their role. Or it could be that there's a few little things that they bring up. So in this case, the mum has had some kind of criminal charge for cannabis use, and that feeds into the epilepsy kind of questions, whether she's um, sorry, my alarm's just going off, and now I can't turn it off. Sorry, I'll ditch that. So there's also questions about whether she might turn back to things like that, or whether, is she really innocent here? Is the medical side of it? So that all these things are brought into the picture, and this is used quite heavily. So this was quite an interesting example of where police might influence a case in a slightly different way. However, we also add the extra questions with dad's behaviour, and the police officer is more questioning, well, is dad a bit more abusive than perhaps being made out? So we have a couple of different layers, which then
Police are often
through.
invited in, and I think it frightens a lot of people, particularly if they've never had a criminal history.
Yeah,
Um, and often in Scotland, for example, the police do need to drive past the homes of those on what is the equivalent of the English equivalent of child protection. And I think people do find the police involvement quite distressing.
yeah, it's frightening, but it's usually not. If there's nothing on record, there's nothing on record, it
Then
will
they don't
usually just
attend
be
again. So they usually just attend the initial
first
one
time.
and they rarely attend again. And people
Yeah.
then start thinking it's getting to criminal when it's not.
No,
So
it's
just as a
it's
heads
a
up.
different. It's part of the MASH sort of team. So MASH is multi-agency safeguarding hub, and there will be representatives from police, from school, from various different service and maternity, different agencies, and usually there will be somebody just to turn up and say, "This is a summary." If there's nothing there, that will be the end of their role. So not to panic at that. However, in this case, we did want the police to kind of have something to offer it, just as an example. So we used mum had cannabis use, just got in the wrong crowd for a short time. And it happens, your teenage years kind of go into the background when you become a parent and should be forgotten. But sometimes these things are dragged up, and that was quite interesting to see that. And in addition, same with dad. So dad might have been falling into the wrong crowd. And that could be the end of it once you become a parent, once you become an adult, you put those years behind you. Or does it? Is this something that influences a person's behavior? Are they more aggressive? Have they been abusive? Is that likely to be the case going forward? And these questions are to remain in the viewer when they're watching the scene unfold. So should we talk about your role and my role? So we've got Sarah was the chair, and so there will usually be an independent kind of, there'll be a social worker from that team, but more experienced, and
Yeah.
they won't be working with that case. So they're coming as a chair to help supervise and manage the who does what, who says what and when, and they're just going to make the final decision as to whether it reaches child protection or CIN, child in need. And those are the two different levels. So a chairperson will hear from everybody, they'll get the scores at the end, and then they'll make a decision about whether that reaches the threshold, or does it go on the child protection register, or is it something that will just be a more voluntary child in need. So do you have any more comments on that, Sarah?
No, I mean the chair usually just tries to keep people in check and in line, stop any squabbling. So in our meeting we actually separated the two parents, which happens quite frequently. But sometimes you've got both parents in the same room, so it will depend on the chair and the social worker as to whether or not you're both allowed in the same room or if it should be shuttled. So sometimes then you get squabbling between parents. So it'd be the chair's role just to sort of, quieten down the children. Um, so, usually their role is just sort of to oversee everything, and just sort of manage sort of meeting length and so on.
And so I was the social worker. I didn't have much of a role because I was kind of like making sure everyone was doing the right thing in the background. So I was kind of observing more. But a social worker for the family, or the allocated social, or the social worker that will be allocated, will be present, and they will go through whatever history is on the local authority file, and they will go through whether that family had any other referrals that the family might not even know about. And this is what's quite scary, is there might be a list of things that you actually never seen before, because they don't always come up and they don't always tell you. They should tell you if a referral, they should send a letter out, but they sometimes don't. If it doesn't meet any threshold, that some, like for example, the health visitor might have referred because they didn't turn up for an appointment, and that wouldn't meet a threshold. It might just be, oh yeah, we've had a phone call, we're closing it, we're not interested. And that
Quite a
would
lot of
be
people
as
have
far
had
as you go.
referrals that they don't know about.
Yeah,
It's usually a medical professional or a teacher or somebody like that, just sort of covering the bottom line
yeah,
and just
cover their
making
backs.
sure that they don't get into trouble for not saying something.
Exactly. Um, so um, that record is then read out, and then that will influence whether that social worker thinks of what the scale will be in terms of their view. Especially if there's quite a few that have gone on in the past, it might influence whether something goes on record now. Historically, stuff that's happened historically shouldn't necessarily influence a particular issue now. However, that's not how humans think. So it's always good to bear in mind, or remind professionals, that this stuff happened historically and we've moved on, but don't expect them to, it doesn't wipe the slate completely, because humans are very suspicious, they're judgmental, they will bring up that history and use it. And it's a very unfortunate situation if that's where you're in, but if you try and cooperate, and we've always reminded me moving forward, you put the past behind you and you've got evidence of that, that should change the narrative going forward. So an ICPC conference, it can be quite scary because of all this stuff in the past.
Yeah, yeah, it's scary because there's a lot of people in the room talking about your worst traits and the worst things that have probably ever happened to you all in one place, and you've got no real right of correcting that.
It's a very powerless place to be in those
Yeah,
meetings,
it
I think.
is. And
I
people
think
often feel like it's very personal, and
yeah,
although it isn't all at the same
yeah.
time, and it's a really hard space to be in.
And moving on from there, I mean, going on to the mum now. She's quite quiet, and I think I deliberately wrote the script so that she would have less of a voice, because that is quite normal. And at times she pipes up saying, it's my choice, I have a right to do it. Da, da, da. Um, on the whole, like, some of the responses are quite quiet and silent because she's left in a powerless situation, and that was deliberate, and that is common to feel that way. Sometimes being overly defensive is problematic in itself, because that looks like you've got more to hide. It Defensiveness takes your power away, and so it's worth remembering not to be
Absolutely
overly
agree with that.
defensive.
It's really easy to want to defend yourself, like I said, when you've got all these people in the room all talking about all the bad things that have ever happened to you, all the bad things you've ever done. It's really easy to start shouting the odds and defend yourself, but sometimes just making short statements, or just sometimes just letting it go, is the most powerful place that you can be in.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, moving forward, I'm looking at the future. I want to put the past behind me. It's those kind of phrases that will get you out of this situation and being seen in the best light. So moving on to dad as well. So we see a very contrast situation between mum's role and dad's role, with the pressure being added to mum trying to get the children to school, no help is being offered and things like that. And then you've got dad who's like, well, I can't do the school run, I have work, that's it. And those roles are still quite traditional, and quite common, that the level of support for mums is still quite low. And most of the time, dads, I think, are getting more involved because mums are working as much as dads are nowadays. But
Mm.
often mums' wages are lower
Yeah,
than dads, depending on what sort of jobs that they end up doing. So we've still got a very much a divide between what's expected
often
of
like
parents.
it's down to mums to navigate childcare through school holidays. It's down to
Medical
mums.
appointments, childcare, organising everything. It still tends to be mainly mothers. It's not always the case, but it does tend to fall squarely on mother's shoulders. And this one, we did put a traditional line. We'll probably do some more of these kind of things where the roles have changed, and we do see fathers getting main custody sometimes because of allegations that have come up. And so
Mhm.
we might bring one of those in the future. But in this one, we kept it kind of fairly traditional. And, you can see that, the pressure is definitely on mum to commit to everything. And also like the way dad is tries to rebut some of what the accusations at him are and does it very effectively in this video. I think he did a great job actually. It's not me, I want, it was, this situation at the time and I had to make a call and things like that, and questioning Kelly, the mum's motives and use of the cannabis. And so bringing historic stuff
Yeah.
to defend him is a very common tactic, and that came through in the video. So watch for those in the video. That will be very common if you're faced in this situation where you've got two parents that are separated and they both have different roles to play. Then there's an undermining of each other, but mainly it might be dad that undermines mum's choices, especially if she's more naturally minded and exploring other options. And that is unfortunately very, very common pattern. Is he right or is she right? And I want the viewers to be guessing on that, because actually sometimes you don't know. You don't know.
It needs unpicking, and it's not always as it appears on the surface. You need to dig deeper
Mm.
and unpick all of those layers. And that's why we do a lot of layered work,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's not always the case of what's in front of you. Don't take everything at face value.
No, exactly. And then we have one other character, which is Tracy, who played Lynn, the aunt, the devoted aunt that loves her nephew to bits. But is she actually a help or a hindrance? So that sometimes you do get family members getting involved. And I have to say, when we do the analysis that we do on the hotline, who the family members are and their coercive influences on the household actually is a big indicator, massive indicator to where the truth is coming from. But you don't always know that. And so sometimes their professional roles, like whether they've been in teaching or police or social care themselves, that influences their decisions. Sometimes you get, ex-nurses, part of a family group, that might have a comment on their, something like this, a
Yeah.
medical issue that emerges. So, just be aware that sometimes
When
family
you mix that
members,
in with the family dynamic, so it's like they've got their professional role and they've got very sort of strong views about how something should go, but then you mix it in with the family dynamics, and they tend to be sort of biased towards their side of the family.
yeah, yeah,
So, it tends to sort of swing the way, in a way that you might not want. And when they're professional, they usually have quite a strong voice and as well as an opinion in all of this, and it can really muddy the waters.
yeah. And that was the intention of portraying how different family members come in. So by adding that extra person into the mix, it looks like dad has more support, and yet here is mum that doesn't get it. It's not getting that support. Be a very, if it was just played a little bit more strongly, it would be a potential transfer of residency to the father in the future. If we were to play that out in the courtroom, that could
Mm.
be a very, very interesting and challenging case in front of a court, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
And equally, the 10-year-old. So in my scenario, I don't think we actually recorded it, but in my script, I put in that this child could be moving to a secondary school, which actually is closer to dad. So does that provide a little risk factor there? I don't think that was actually in the final recording, but it would be an interesting future scenario. So just for viewers to think through perhaps what dad is aiming for here. Is there potential, let's change residency, let's have my aunt take over? Or is this purely, actually, no, I'm concerned about mum and, I want her to have some support and I can't do anything else because I'm working. So there's all those dynamics at play, which aren't always given away in the meeting anyway. So the fact it wasn't recorded is actually quite truthful in terms of what then we see a few months down the line playing out in practice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so any other final words on any of those aspects? So we've got sort of
I
at
think
least.
we just want the viewer to really read the meeting and see what it is they truly think is actually happening here, just based on first impressions, and maybe sort of play devil's advocate of like which side they're taking and what they would do next. And I think it'd be good if we can attempt the next stage meeting with all of our team as to what we're going to make happen next.
And just one note, I think Sarah was struggling with the script. So we were going to have a little bit more of an intro, and it didn't happen. So forgive us there. But normally there would be a little bit more of an introduction on what happens and why in ICPC. But it did come out in the second half. And
Sarah had
then
a technological fail.
we were having dramas that day. But equally, I was sort of scripted this as if it was going to go on to child protection, but it didn't. It went on to CIM, which is fine because actually that's probably more realistic with the social workers' kind of demands and thresholds. So it was intentionally going to be child protection, but it's dropped down to CIN. But it could have gone either way for a case like this. It was really sort of which one, and maybe have a think, what would you have done in that situation? Where would you have scored it? Where would you place it? Do these children need additional help? And when you talk about help for social service, it really is just coming in, observing, making notes and reports. And then there's not really often a huge amount that would actually be offered to someone like this. It would just be checking in and making sure she's complying with everything that's been suggested. CIN is voluntary, so would this mum go back and allow them in, or is she going to refuse because it's well within her right to refuse? And what do the professionals then make of that? So those are the other scenarios that fall out from this one. But I hope you enjoy watching it, and I hope that you see the coercive layers, that you see the different dynamics and the power plays going on behind the scenes. Watch for groupthink as the scoring. Who aligns with who for the scoring is a very interesting one. So obviously,
Yep.
medical professionals will back each other up.
And
Social
also
might be
watch
new,
for
you know.
how, because we shuttled the mum and dads, watch how the professionals are different with each party.
Yes. So pay close attention, and those things are the script was written from all the experiences. It was completely hypothetical, completely made up, but it was based on a lot of cases that we've been involved with, so we know that these kind of things play out. So yeah, and provide us feedback, and we'll try and do another one soon. Okay, thank you very much for watching.
Brilliant.